Chapter 6, Anticipation 2-2. Chapter 5, Anticipation 2-2, 1991, 1992. Percy is 15 and 28, Snape is 31, Quirrell is 24, Harry is 11 and newly arriving at Hogwarts. January 1992, one more notable thing happens over Christmas, but Percy does not like to think about it. He sees one shining, frozen moment of perfection in a mirror. His family, whole and grateful and alive, their faces turned toward him, gratitude shining from their matching brown and blue eyes. Myrtle hovers behind him, smiling impishly. His older self looks out proudly and serenely, unspeakable robes around his body, locket around his neck, sword and cup resting behind him, and the glint of the diadem on his head. In his eyes is the assurance of a man who has solved every problem laid at his feet. In the hard set of his face is victory. Percy looks at it for a very long time before he steps away and does not look back. He forbids Ron and Harry from returning and does not return himself. This mirror shows only his desires, nothing more, and Percy knows better than to linger on his desires. In both universes, it takes more than a warning to deter Harry. In both universes, neither Ron nor Percy feel the same wild urge to visit every night that the small chosen one feels deep inside his core. The rest of the winter holidays is lonely and sleepless, Percy laying awake in the empty silence of his dormitory, staring up at the blood-red curtains as the wan winter moon shines through the high tower window. The night before school term resumes, Percy cannot bear the image on the back of his eyelids anymore and swings his feet out of bed, sliding his socked feet into his sturdy day shoes and slipping his Weasley sweater over his head as protection against the chill. Snape is in his chambers, preparing for the following day. Quirrell is in the Forbidden Forest, and Percy is not fool enough to follow him there. He runs his eyes over the original map, checking for other threats. Filch in his office, McGonagall in her rooms, Flitwick in the staff room. Dumbledore is not on the map, but he so rarely is at the school that Percy discounts him as well. He carefully casts a disillusionment charm. Percy is used to the slimy feeling trickling down his neck by now and does not even flinch. He's become quite adept at sneaking around. His shoes are enchanted to be quiet. His clothes have been spelled to the best of his ability against rustling, and he even recently found a smell to eliminate odors. For all his midnight preparations, however, he finds Myrtle waiting for him by the entrance to the third floor. "I can still see you, you know," she says, quite gleeful at his obvious distress. She waves what she continues to call Myrtle's map. "Forgot I had this, did you?" Percy rolls his eyes, some of the melancholy underpinning his solemn nightly actions banished by her chilly presence. "Blast! I hardly expected you to be stalking me," he sniffs, holding out an invisible hand for the new map. "How can you see me anyway?" "Disillusionment charms don't work on ghosts," Myrtle reveals. "We get to follow students sneaking about and see what mischief they're up to, you know. But I never report a student unless she's doing something she ought to get reported for." Myrtle giggles dreamily, particularly the students going for a rendezvous on the astronomy tower. "Thanks for that image, Myrtle," Percy says dryly. Myrtle is rather obsessed with teenagers, which he theorizes is due to her own girlhood being cut short. That, or the fact that the only company she's had for 50 years are her fellow ghosts and a smattering of lonely girls. "So what mischief are we causing?" "We are not causing any mischief," Percy insists. "You can stand guard." "I want to see what's past the first line of defense." Myrtle's pout shimmers in the dark corridor. "You said you trusted me, Percy. You said we're friends." She looks at him slyly from under curling grey eyelashes and adds imperiously, "I'm coming with you, and that's final." "Myrtle," Percy groans, "it may be dangerous." "Yes, for you," she points out triumphantly. "I doubt anything in there can hurt me. Like you said, I can be your guard. I'll go for help if anything goes wrong." Percy checks his watch, considering this. He doesn't know how long Quirrell will be in the Forbidden Forest. He wouldn't put it past the Dark Lord to insist on a late-night visit to the third floor. "Fine," he says ungraciously. "But if something goes wrong, go to McGonagall or Snape, not Flitwick or Sprout." He pulls out a small music box that he'd found in his holiday perusal of the other dormitory rooms, belonging to some sentimental first year who'd left it on his bedside table. Percy imagines the look of glee on Alexander's face if Percy had brought a similar item to their room even at 11, and has to debate with himself whether it would be a mercy to lose the item beneath the boy's bed when he returns it. Alohomora, says Percy quietly. One of the spells he is entirely proficient at wandlessly. Before he opens the door, he taps on the music box with his wand. It begins playing softly, almost eerily in the otherwise complete silence of the corridor. The door opens with a soft click. Myrtle dashes in and reports back that there's a Cerberus in Hogwarts, is asleep. Holding his breath and replenishing all of his protective charms, Percy carefully walks into the room. Myrtle kneels and tugs at the trapdoor, but she isn't strong enough to lift it, even with her poltergeist practice. Percy motions her aside with a stern look and casts a silent levitation spell. He can control it enough to carefully and slowly lift the door, letting it settle on the floor with a soft creak. Down, Percy mouths at her, and Myrtle obediently swoops down. He has to admit that having a ghost is a useful adventure partner, if only for the advanced notice. Some sort of plant, she whispers in his ear, her breath a chilly gust. I can't see. Percy worries his lip and then inches over to the trapdoor, sending a small ball of light down. He can see the plant, a writhing mess of vines that retreats slightly when the light reaches the bottom. Devil's snare. It's not a particularly dangerous plant if one has advanced warning. Percy holds his breath and jumps into it, sending several balls of light out of his wand as soon as he lands with a thud in the middle of the vines. A few seconds later, he slides into the room at the bottom. Myrtle flies through the plant and joins him, giggling. That was easy, she says enthusiastically. Percy nods, but he does not smile. Too easy. Quirrell has been keeping guard on the third floor for months now. Percy refuses to believe that the man would be unable to get past at least the three-headed dog and the devil's snare, particularly when possessed by the Dark Lord. Perhaps the defenses get progressively harder. The two trudge in silence down a downward sloping passage, only to blink in surprise as they emerge into a brilliantly lit room with dozens of birds. No keys, Percy amends, seeing a brass key fly by his ear. Flitwick, he thinks to himself. Percy incants a spell McGonagall taught him, meant to help students understand the idea of magical resonance. Most of the keys glow a soft blue, but one of them there glows orange. When he repeats the spell on the door, the lock glows the same fiery color. After that, it's easy. A quick Amobulus stops the key's flight, and a carefully targeted Accio summons the orange key. It's too easy, Percy says out loud. Myrtle stops examining the keys and turns to him. Why is this even here? Percy wars with what to tell her. I'm not sure, but I think it is to guard something, he says slowly. But these defenses are rather easy to pass, aren't they? For a good wizard, Myrtle says. Not for a ghost, but an average wizard. Myrtle shrugs. Maybe the thief isn't expected to be an average wizard. Maybe the expected thief is a ghost or a shoddy wizard. He thinks about this while they continue to the next challenge. Perhaps Dumbledore expected the Dark Lord to be a shade. Maybe the man doesn't know that Quirrell is possessed. Perhaps these challenges would stymie a shade. But why not just store the stone in some sort of unbreakable container? Chess! Myrtle crows excitedly as they reach a large stone cavern. And suddenly, Percy has his answer. It's a game. The challenges are set up like a game to keep the Dark Lord playing, he theorizes. If Dumbledore does not know Quirrell is possessed, and if he does know, allowing that man to teach is simply unforgivable, then he would want to keep the Dark Lord engaged until Dumbledore can figure out how to defeat him. Perhaps these challenges could feasibly be overcome by a shade, though with great difficulty. Maybe the last challenge will be an unbreakable box of some sort. Let the Dark Lord bide his time, defeating three-headed dogs and winged keys, while the true prize lays protected elsewhere. His theory makes sense. Percy decides firmly, nodding to himself. He turns to the giant chessboard and smiles fondly. It is obviously Professor McGonagall's contribution. This one, at least, he has heard of before, although he didn't quite realize that chasing the Philosopher's Stone was how Ron encountered a giant chess set. Ron had always described it as if they had merely stumbled upon it one day. Beating the chess set is not difficult either. He finds it capable of merely executing basic maneuvers, and Myrtle, as a ghost, is not compelled to compete. She cheers encouragement from the sidelines, while Percy directs from the position of king. The Dark Lord would certainly be capable of beating this chess set, Percy concludes as he steps off the chess set. and moves to the door. Behind him, the pieces straighten and reassemble in their original positions. All the Dark Lord would need is a body to activate the magic. Therefore, Dumbledore must not realize the Dark Lord already has a body. Percy does not have time to think about it, because all of a sudden he's fighting a mountain troll. Gasping, Percy staggers to the next chamber and collapses, barely noticing how flames spring up beside him. Myrtle collapses next to him, giggling weakly. Did you see how I shot at his eyes? Percy cannot respond. If it had not been for Myrtle, he would likely be dead. The relative placidity of the last few challenges lulled him into a false sense of confidence. It had taken far more than a simple immobilus to immobilize the mountain troll. Myrtle had flown into its face repeatedly, distracting and enraging it, while Percy struggled to gather his wits. It had taken 3 layered stupefies and a freezing charm to fell the beast, and Percy had only managed to steal the time to conjure those spells because Myrtle had shouted at him to transfigure a barrier to momentarily keep the troll back. Percy adds reflex training to his mental list and shakes his head, collecting himself. "Thank you," he says shakily to Myrtle. "You're not a very fast spell caster, are you?" Myrtle says in response. The familiar urge to roll his eyes further steadies Percy, and he gets to his feet. This challenge, he discerns instantly, is Snape. But the puzzle is easy. The earlier sense of frustration returns as he scans the riddle and quickly discerns which bottle to drink. Tom Riddle would most definitely be able to solve this instantly. The next room is empty. Percy's first reaction is frustration. His second reaction is relief. This room, he thinks, will be harder for a Dark Lord to get through. Maybe the stone is hidden in here, concealed in the walls or in a hidden trapdoor. He looks around and suddenly feels a dawning panic. Perhaps this room is the room designed to trap the Dark Lord. Where was Vector's challenge, or Trelawney's, or Sinistra's? Were the challenges only from the professors in the order, just the heads of houses? Whose challenge was the troll, Quirrell's? None of it really makes sense. Dumbledore must be playing a game that Percy cannot recognize. "Myrtle," Percy says very slowly, tamping down on the panic that threatens to overwhelm him. "Can you go back into the other room and see if you can get back in here? If you can't, give it 30 minutes and then go for help. Snape or McGonagall in that order." Myrtle quickly dips out and then dips back in. "The room has reset," she reports. "The bottles are filled and the fire is back. But I can come back here." Percy turns and looks at the fire behind him. "There is a non-zero probability that I am stuck in here," he says, fighting to keep the panic out of his voice. His mind whirls through the possibilities. Could Myrtle throw the bottle through the fire? Should he get help? Is there another room? Myrtle echoes that thought a second later. "We don't know if this is the end," she points out. "If all the professors were involved, there would be dozens of rooms." "True, true," Percy says distractedly, taking out his wand. "You keep an eye on the map. I'll look for a way out." He begins casting detection charms, the systematic process clearing the panic from his mind. One has to do these things in the proper order, without rushing. He first checks for humans and finds none. He then checks for ghosts and finds only Myrtle. And finally he checks for animals and once again finds nothing. The flames, though enchanted, are undoubtedly hot enough to be dangerous, and none of the many flame-freezing charms that Percy knows are sufficient to quell their heat. Then he begins examining the walls. He looks for hidden compartments and glistening wards. He casts the affinity spell, and the walls glow faintly, merely indicating that they were magically constructed by the same person. He runs his hands over the surfaces and even sends Myrtle in all directions to look for tunnels or passageways. The ceiling is clear of enchantments, the floor is solid rock, and the only way in or out of the room is through the black fire dancing in the doorway. Temporarily stymied, Percy conjures himself a chair and sits, delicately crossing his legs. Myrtle ducks back into the room. "All rock in that direction," she says, indicating the last wall. She shudders. "I hate passing through rock. It's so solid. It feels like you've just eaten a very large meal and you want to throw up." Percy wearily puts aside the question of how Myrtle remembers that sensation and instead focuses on his predicament. "And you can't throw the bottle in here or carry it through." She shakes her head. "I can't fly through the fire, and I can't bring the bottle through the wall," Myrtle says for what is maybe the 5th time. "I tried to throw it through, but it bounced off the flames." Percy bites his lip, thinking over his options. I can't apparate in Hogwarts, he says grumpily. Note to self, research why. I can get help, Myrtle offers half-heartedly. Neither of them want to cut their adventure short so soon, and while both McGonagall and Snape do offer Percy a longer leash than most, he shudders to think of their anger finding him at a place so blatantly out of bounds. Good thing he's not a prefect, he thinks to himself bitterly. No, there's got to be some way out. The professors come in here, I'm sure. They wouldn't have had a room that is impossible to get out. There must be some failsafe. It'll be morning soon, Myrtle points out unhelpfully. Best find it soon or you'll miss breakfast. Do professors have some way to get around Hogwarts that students don't? Percy asks finally, ignoring her comments. Myrtle thinks about it. Sometimes they use house elves if they have to get somewhere really quickly. Otherwise, I think they just walk. Professors can call house elves. Can students? Percy sits up. Stupid, of course they can. That would explain how professors can appear at the scene of a disturbance nearly instantly, even if their classrooms are on the opposite side of the castle. Myrtle shrugs. I think so. Not sure I've seen anyone do it, but I don't really pay too much attention to the elves, to be honest. House elf, Percy calls at once. I summon a Hogwarts house elf. I am a student of Hogwarts, and this additional entreaty proves to be unnecessary, as a small and wrinkled house elf pops into existence right in front of Percy. Percy and Myrtle exchange looks of glee. Mimsy, sir, here to serve a student of Hogwarts, the house elf chirps, sweeping a low bow. The elf looks around it and gives a visible double take. Student of Hogwarts, sir, is in a forbidden place. It was an accident, Percy says primly. Can you take me out of here to a non-forbidden place? Mimsy is not supposed to pop students, the house elf considers out loud thoughtfully. But you is in a bad place. You's not supposed to be here, student of Hogwarts, sir. Just take me where you came from. Percy holds out an encouraging hand, trying to dampen his impatience with the creature. He knows that house elves struggle with conflicting commands, and this must certainly be a conflict. You're not doing anything wrong. Just helping a student of Hogwarts. Mimsy supposes she can iron her ears if she needs to, Mimsy says doubtfully, and pops him away. He appears in the kitchen. House elf magic is wonderful, really so much more calming than apparition. It's been so long in this life, since Percy had the ability to magically appear anywhere, that he luxuriates in it for an entire 30 seconds before he refocuses. It is nearly morning, and so there are several house elves bustling around, rolling out pastries for breakfast. His stomach rumbles, and before he knows it, Mimsy has reappeared at his elbow with a strong black tea and eggs on toast, his preferred breakfast. He takes a seat, munching on his toast thoughtfully. He feels like he's hit upon something, but he isn't exactly how to best use this new knowledge. Mimsy, he calls, and she reappears again. Can you go anywhere in Hogwarts? Mimsy nods proudly. Mimsy knows the whole castle, she says proudly. Mimsy works very hard. If I gave you a task, Mimsy, would you be able to keep it a secret? Extra work, he says enticingly. Myrtle is not going to be pleased with him for taking a task, and to be fair, she has made significant progress over the holiday break. But Myrtle is limited by not being able to carry objects through walls, and so some rooms she is entirely unable to enter with the map, even if she knows of their existence. Mimsy thinks about it. She shoots a glance around her, but none of the other elves pay her any mind. Depends on the work, she says, her low tone almost conspiratorial. Mimsy is very fast worker, not enough work for Mimsy. You look like a very efficient elf, Percy says with approval. He holds out the map. All I want is for you to visit every room in the castle with this. Mimsy looks at it doubtfully. Cleared, it looks like normal parchment. Mimsy would never dare to ask why, but if Mimsy were so bold, Mimsy would ask why student of Hogwarts, sir, wants Mimsy to take a blank parchment around the castle, she says very innocently. Percy chuckles, his fondness for this elf growing by the minute. I am Percy, he introduces himself. I am doing a survey of the castle for a project. I'm just trying to get a list of every room. Mimsy doesn't know how to write, Master Percy, sir, she admits, twisting her ears. Mimsy is not a good enough elf to help Master Percy, sir, with his project. Mimsy will iron. Stop, he orders, and her mouth clicks shut. Do not punish yourself unless I ask you to. It's tiresome. She nods, her ears flapping frantically. All Mimsy needs to do is take this paper into every room, and the magic will fill it in. he instructs carefully. Do not tell anybody and return it to me when you are done. If you lose this paper, Mimsy, I will be very upset, do you understand? I will punish you myself. Mimsy nods again, even more frantically. Mimsy will never, she bursts out. Mimsy will guard magic parchment with her life. Mimsy will. Mimsy will help Master Percy, sir, with his projects. Mimsy is a good elf. Mimsy will. Stop, he orders again, wearily. Do you promise to do the task and not to tell anyone? Mimsy nods. He promises, sir, she says, cocking her ears earnestly. Mimsy very sneaky. Percy dismisses her after putting a tracking charm on the map. He's reasonably certain nobody would be able to open it easily if it is lost, and he has the other version in his pocket anyway. The first week of classes is horrid. Percy is tired after his fruitless nightly adventure. He yawns his way through potions. Snape eyes him, but does not directly comment, and Arithmancy, ducking his head to avoid Vector's glare. Over lunch, he sits away from his peers, as is his custom. He reads through his notebook, trying to center himself. Keeping track of so many simultaneous projects is exhausting. Landon and Henry slide on the bench next to him. Percy does not react, hoping they will take the hint. They do not. Henry even has the audacity to lean over Percy's shoulder to look at his notebook. Luckily, Percy developed a charm to make it nonsense to other people. Hello, Percy. How was your break? Landon finally says sardonically when Percy does not acknowledge his presence for several seconds. Henry snickers. Percy mentally groans. He likes his yearmates more and more each year as they transform into something approaching adults, but sometimes he wishes they would all leave him alone, for Merlin's sake. Unproductive, he says, flipping the page. He was planning on rewriting his to-do matrix during the lunch hour, but he feels uncomfortable doing that in front of his peers, not quite trusting the charm would disguise his movements. Thank you for the Christmas gift, Landon continues doggedly. At this, Percy looks up in confusion. Yes, the Christmas gift that you didn't get me, despite me sending you gifts for the last 3 years. I don't typically do gifts, Percy says, entirely truthfully. He hadn't gotten anybody that wasn't a family member a gift in nearly 3 decades. You're very hard to be friends with, you know that. You're such a prat. Landon storms away and Percy watches him, entirely nonplussed. Henry clears his throat. Did you forget he invited us to his Christmas ball? His what? Henry, normally so calm, looks at him with something approaching disgust. His annual Christmas ball. The Greengrass family has it every year. Percy thinks back. He supposes he can faintly recall Landon mentioning the Christmas ball once or twice. He invited us. You really are a prat, Percy, Henry says, shaking his head. Landon turned 15 this year, so he was named heir presumptive to the Greengrass family. That means he can issue invitations of his own. He was really excited about inviting some of us, especially since, Percy raises an eyebrow in the sudden silence. Especially since, well, Henry says uncomfortably. Since you and Theodora aren't, traditionally invited to Greengrass events. A Weasley and a Muggle-born, and a foreign one at that. Yes, neither Percy nor Theodora would have been invited to the Greengrass ball. Old resentment, nearly buried, licks at Percy. Resentment that had once driven him to reject his family and seek out more for himself. The resentment curdles in his stomach, and he stands, sweeping up his things. Since I doubt I would have been welcomed anyway, perhaps it is good I did not attend. He leaves Henry sitting there, gazing after him in frustration. Percy spends the rest of the day impatiently going through the motions of his day. Now that he is finally in his OWL classes, he cannot while away every class by concentrating on his other projects. For one, his professors require much more active participation, and for another, Percy is not so familiar with the minutiae of each lesson that he can afford to entirely tune out the proceedings. But later, in his bed, he's able to close his eyes and clear his mind, going through the motions of his nightly sort. A few things are clear. He pulls up a mental sheet of parchment in his mind and begins a new to-do list, which he'll copy over first thing in the morning to his journal. The first point to cover is that he is not nearly as good in an emergency as he always thinks he ought to be. He'd frozen when the troll attacked and panicked in the last room. If Myrtle hadn't been there both times, he could be dead or trapped. He's been practicing dueling for the last 5 years, but in a very theoretical way. He knows enough spells for nearly any challenge, of course, and he can cast many of them wordlessly and 4 of them wordlessly, but he does need to work on his speed. It should be trivial once he forms a training plan. Dueling is just reflexes, after all. He will have to think of something. Perhaps Tonks can suggest to him some sort of strategy. The second point to consider is thus: whatever Dumbledore is planning has not yet coalesced into fruition. The stone is not yet in the challenges, if it ever will be for real, unless Percy had completely failed something obvious in the final room, which he does not think is particularly likely given his in-depth examination of it while trapped. Either the stone is fake bait, or Dumbledore has reasonable cause to believe that Quirrell will wait a while longer to strike. If Percy remembers correctly, the trio does not perform their stunt until quite late in the year, after exams. Something is holding the Dark Lord back. The third point follows, given point 2. The stone is hidden somewhere else. Percy lies in his bed and stares at the hanging, thinking about it. The philosopher's stone, not that he would use it necessarily, but he has to admit it would be helpful. Of course, he isn't fool enough to attempt the elixir of immortality. He's read the literature about the wizards who fail at the task. Snape rather gleefully sets all sixth-year students to that essay, just in case any of them have any delusions of grandeur. But the stone can turn things into gold. His money problems would be entirely abated. He could purchase all of the books that he needed. He could perfect his disguises. He could even buy relics and pose as a wealthy collector, infiltrating Borgin and Burke's. He could mingle with high society. He could make rare potions. He could use the gold to save the world. And then he would return it. Percy is fair. He wouldn't keep it forever, just until the war was over and he had no need for gold. He could return it anonymously to Nicholas Flamel, and nobody would be the wiser. February 1992, despite 4 years of tension leading up to the Dark Lord arriving at Hogwarts, Percy has to admit that the Shade does very little. Quirrell seemingly ignores Harry completely, never even approaching Gryffindor Tower. He wanders the Forbidden Forest nearly every night, but for what purpose, Percy can only guess. His current theory is that he is collecting ingredients for a restorative potion of some sort, particularly since he seems to spend every full moon in the forest. Snape follows Quirrell almost as obsessively as Percy. Of course, he does not have the advantage of a magical map, and so must risk the Dark Lord's ire. It is strange, of course, that if Dumbledore believes the Dark Lord is to return, he still allows his spy to get so close to Quirrell. What is Snape's alibi? Merely distrust of a rival professor. His yearmates are giving him the cold shoulder, which Percy only notices when Snape points it out in a potions lesson. He's been working alone in class, he supposes, but he'd refuse to admit he missed Landon as his potions partner. After all, he's significantly more efficient on his own, without Landon's constant chatter in his ear. "It does not faze you," Snape comments when Percy replies something to that effect. "Your exclusion." Percy shrugs. "Not particularly. 15-year-olds are volatile and emotional and alien to him in more ways than one. Once it would have bothered him, really bothered him, but Percy finds if he does not think on it too much, he forgets that his classmates are even there." Snape smiles nastily. "Given that you have no adolescent drama to distract you from our lessons, I have decided to up the ante, as it were." "Are you going to give me essays to mark, sir?" Percy asks innocently. Henry, when he asked for more advanced work during one of the group sessions, was promptly relegated to marking the first-year essays and has been complaining about it for weeks. Snape's lips twitch, and he looks rather pleased with himself. "Alas, that task is unfortunately taken by several students dimmer than you, if we can believe such a thing exists. No, the task I have in mind for you is more hands-on, shall we say." Percy can hardly hide his excitement, forgetting about Landon's ire in an instant. Finally, he's being recognized for the hours of work he's poured into his potions tutorials. Snape no longer rips him to pieces, and instead seems to enjoy the casual bantering that Percy excels in. "You once brought me a recipe for a portrait, although my sources tell me you've stopped attending the silly little club," Snape says silkily. "I feel as though it is time that we revisit that charade." "I paint on my own, sir," Percy says, though he thinks guiltily that he has not painted anything for months on end. He's worried about what he will paint if he does. "Doubtful, but I hardly care. We are to begin working with some of the ingredients used in the potion you provided me." Be warned, Mr. Weasley, many of them are explosive, and I shall not be providing any healing salve. Are we harvesting, sir? Percy wrinkles his nose. That had not been what he had envisioned. Snape looks happy and Percy's stomach stinks. Ingredients collection is not the type of activity in which Percy excels. He much prefers intellectual exercises to the physical. Oh, yes, he says. We begin next week. Percy returns to painting, feeling a bit chastised. Given that his meager social life has disappeared completely, and that Mimsy and Myrtle are taking care of adding to the map, he actually has a bit of free time for once. Percy is also able, for once, to banish his inner voice from his head that snidely points out every time Percy is not actively working on defeating the Dark Lord. He doesn't think too much about why. He's working on a large oil portrait of his father, an acceptable thing to paint by any metric that wins him a fair amount of acclaim from the other members. Professor McGonagall comes to see it one day as he does the finishing touches and stands by it for a long time quietly. It will be nice to have a portrait artist in Britain again, she says, when the silence begins to fray. Percy looks up in surprise. Oh, I'm not sure if I'll be a portrait artist, he says hastily, and then tries for a joke. I'm hoping to be an animagus first. This startles a laugh out of her. We'll get you to transform yet, Mr. Weasley. I don't doubt you at all. Percy returns to his portrait feeling very warm. Portraiture is actually very interesting. If he actually is to animate a portrait with the soul, or sliver of a soul, he supposes, of a subject, he will need to obtain a magical brush with a wand core, enchant his own set of paints, and seek out a representative sample of the subject. It still baffles him that the process can be so dark, yet so common. Hypocrites. Now that the sting of Snape's rebuke has worn off, and Percy has become proficient in purification rituals, Percy returns to reading about dark magic, specifically the magic wrought with souls and blood. Certain spells seem to be dangerous, particularly offensive spells, but rituals and potions and enchantments and wards, on the other hand, appear to perform their intended purpose and be done. Percy's theory is that dark magic that relies on the soul or the magic or the blood of another are sated, whereas spells anchored by the caster and nothing else hunger for more. He practices another dark ritual in his room during one of the Quidditch matches, away from Myrtle or his roommates' prying eyes. This one is simple and far less harmful. It will merely warn him if someone is speaking about him too often. The process is solemn, and he feels chills run up his spine, as he does when he reads a very old text or hears certain songs. It is the feeling of tapping into tradition that stretches back to Merlin and Morgana when magic was wild and fey and had a mind of its own. It evokes warlocks and casting circles, purification rites and scrying. As he chants softly in the light of a small, pungent candle, dripping blood deliberately into a copper bowl, tracing runes in the air with his wand, he feels connected to his pureblood heritage in a way that Weasleys rarely experience. The mixture in the bowl hisses and spits, but as he adds the last of his blood it quells. This further lends credence to his hypothesis that these rituals need a sufficient offering, and then are placated. Using a brush of the Stral's hair, purchased surreptitiously over the holiday break, he paints the mixture onto his left forearm, and then breathes the final words onto the glistening runes. They glow amber and then disappear. Why is this dark? Is it because he is using blood? The wizarding world is so backward sometimes, and it drives him insane. There is nothing inherently wrong with many of these rituals, and inside him that realization hisses and then settles like the blood in his bowl. March 1992, dear Percival, all four paws. Solid progress, mate. Paws must be easier than wings, though. Do you sit on your bed with your feet and hands as paws? Does it feel weird? Still a little sad you won't be a bird. We all know Charlie will inevitably be the first dragon animagus and will leave you in the dust, yapping away on the ground. Tough luck. Anyway, Moody is intense. Begun to see conspiracies everywhere. Constant vigilance. Makes me distrust even you. Hey, you aren't hiding some big secret from me, are you? You are a rather evasive boy. Moody says he's tired of me and I'm a hopeless failure, but I know that's just how he shows affection. I just have to filter everything he says through an advanced translation. I imagine that's what you're like with Snape. I can't believe he takes you on harvesting dates in the middle of the night. Under the full moon, no less. Romantic. Hope no werewolves ruin the mood. How's your owl year going? Surprised you haven't had a mental breakdown yet. Charlie makes it sound like you're liable to snap at a single exam or something. How's Myrtle? I still can't believe you befriended a ghost. Your yearmates are still upset at you. Just apologize to Landon. Trust me, he's waiting for a formal apology. He probably enlisted the Steelfellow heir to speak to you as an acceptable in-between. Do you not know the apologies? You can ask my mum for advice. She knows all the pureblood rituals. Okay, have to dash. Don't keep fighting with your mates. Hogwarts should be a fun time. Cheers. Tonks. Percy finds to his surprise that he misses Landon more than he thought he would. Particularly now that the other boy is 15, rather than 12, Landon's good humor and wit are not unenjoyable for Percy to experience. He waited for Landon to forgive him, but when March twists its chilly way around the corner and Landon still is ignoring him in class, Percy gathers his courage and goes to formally apologize. The other boy gives him a disdainful glance, but warms slightly when Percy bows at the waist. Madame Tonks was very helpful in describing the best apology he should use. Aunt Muriel less so, as she insisted on knowing the details of the fight, and then decisively told Percy not to apologize to a Greengrass. My apologies for my slight, Percy says, very formally. I wish to extend my wand, and upon my honor request your presence at the naming of my error. Landon looks at him coolly. Percy is once again aware that the 15-year-old boy in front of him is set to inherit a standing that the Weasleys can only dream of attaining. I accept your request, he says finally, and the imperious gesture of his hand is impossibly graceful. Percy burns with admiration for the way that a boy half his age is able to command such presence. He straightens from his bow but does not sit. Neither does Landon stand. Percy knows what this means. His apology had better be good. I struggle with the lowering of my family, he says honestly. He's rewarded by the widening of Landon's eyes. My Aunt Muriel is training me to be an heir of the Prowett legacy, but my training has been late and scattered. I am aware primarily of what privileges I lack, monetarily, socially, and intellectually. I at times keep myself distant from those I feel would disdain me. I felt as though your invitation was a slight, not a compliment. For that I apologize. I should have remembered that you are a friend to me and not a foe. Not quite spoken in the ancient ways, but Percy wants to be honest, at least when he can. He can admit to himself these days that he is jealous of his peers, that he longs for a heritage more glittering than the Weasley line. It does not cost him as much to admit this to Landon as it would have in his previous life. Your training is incomplete, which explains many things, Landon says, matching his formal cadence while also discarding the traditional words. I was not made aware of your new status. I invited you as a friend, and not according to your standing as the heir presumptive. For that I too extend my wand in apology to match your own. Another pause. Then Landon grins and the spell of the earlier moment is broken. You twat, Landon says, motioning Percy to sit. Why didn't you tell me what you were really feeling? Percy shrugs and settles delicately into the chair opposite Landon. I suppose I was too embarrassed, he says, a tad uncomfortable. You and Henry and all the rest, you've been training to uphold these legacies your entire life. All I've got is 2 weeks a year with an ancient aunt against the wishes of my parents. Landon looks mischievous. I hereby invite you to spend a week under the Greengrass roof to amend for your slight, and so I may present you to my family, he intones with a slight incline of his head. You can't deny that. It'd be rude. There, we've increased your training time by 50%. Not bad for one apology. Percy looks down, trying to hide how much that means to him. He's not particularly close to Landon, but by the same token, he's one of the closest friends he's ever had in either timeline, Penelope notwithstanding. Thank you, he says, and tries to impress how grateful he is. With Landon and Henry speaking to him again, he finds his free time more limited. As a result, he spends most of his nights foregoing sleep to work on his other projects. His animagus form is progressing slowly but steadily. His patronus fails to materialize, his occlumency improves, and he finds a few light rituals that could be promising to aid in Horcrux destruction. He also decides to check in on the stone. Ron, Harry, and Hermione look at him with matching looks of mistrust. Percy smiles winningly. He's made an effort to spend more time with the tiny trio in an attempt to ingratiate himself with him, occasionally dropping in at meals or proofreading Ron's truly horrific essays. He is grateful for many reasons that Ron did not end up in Ravenclaw. Nevertheless, they display early signs of the clannish devotion that later characterized their friendship, refusing to socialize with their peers or confide in an elder sibling. Percy wants to know why they wait until the end of the year to go after the stone. They must know it's there by now. With the clue of Nicholas Flamel likely planted by Dumbledore, the stone is an obvious leap. Do they learn of Quirrell's treachery? Is Harry kidnapped and Ron and Hermione attempted rescuers? Does Dumbledore lure them in? It was for an extra credit assignment I was completing. Hermione lies somewhat credibly. He raises an eyebrow at her. And you asked these two for help? She sniffs. It's a sound she never fully grows into. I thought it might interest them in their schoolwork. He focuses his attention on Ron next as the weak link. What did you learn about Flamel then? Ron, interestingly, looks to Harry and not to Hermione before answering. Harry gives a short shake of his head, his hair falling over his scar into his eyes. Dunno, Ron says shiftily. Made lots of gold. And you? Harry squints and eyes Percy. His skeptical expression is out of place on a face so young. The chosen one is still the smallest boy in his year, and Percy cannot imagine him facing Riddle's shade in just a few months. He lives forever, is Harry's contribution. He hesitates but tries to smoothly say, he has a stone, seems pretty magical. Percy is beginning to have a headache. And how are your professors? Clearly you lot are doing well in your classes if you're completing extra work. Why do you even care? Ron grumbles. Ronnie, lad, Percy always cares about his wee siblings. Fred interjects mockingly. Percy stiffens. How long had the twins been there? Not for the first time, Percy curses sharing a tower with so many of his siblings. George nods solemnly from where he'd appeared at Percy's elbow. He writes long letters to Mum, updating her on our progress. George did not complete his essay adequately, Fred begins, mimicking Percy in a high and unflattering tone. Fred is having trouble in potions, George continues, his own voice ingratiating. Ronald won't eat his vegetables, Percy breaks in finally. Will you two knock it off? I only write to Mum because neither of you can be bothered to let her know how you're doing, and I won't apologize for it. Harry and Hermione, both only children, shift as they witness the brothers' squabble. Percy senses him losing his opportunity to wheedle information from them and tries to pick an easy topic that will send away the twins. Fred, I hear from Professor Snape that you're improving in potions. Ron groans. You talked to Snape about us. Fred sniggers. Percy loves Snape, always taking private lessons from him. He'll probably propose marriage at the end of his newts. Hermione looks aghast, but not at the concept of Percy marrying Snape, which is certainly the cause of the matching grimaces on Harry and Ron's faces. You can take private lessons. Had she not known, Percy files this away for later perusal, watching Harry give Ron a deeply meaningful look. Professor Snape doesn't particularly like any of us, but he tolerates me as long as I do good work, Percy continues. He seems to enjoy insulting all of you in front of me. He's watching us. Harry can't hold in his outburst any longer. He turns triumphantly to Hermione. He's spying on us. Poor Harry, doomed to always be right in the end. Fred and George snicker and begin to tease Ron about Snape watching him in his sleep. Do you think he knows Ron still has a stuffed bear? Do you think he knows Ron wishes it was a stuffed spider? While Percy muses over Harry's outburst, they suspect Snape. And what of Quirrell? Percy breaks in, keeping one eye on whether Ron is liable to turn to tears over the twins' teasing. How is he? Useless, Fred snorts. Not even a vampire. Did you see the snowballs? Wicked, right? My idea, George chimes in proudly. Percy has to fight to keep a look of horror off his face when he realizes his twin brothers enchanted snowballs to bounce off the face of the Dark Lord. Merlin, it's a wonder he didn't immediately call for the swift execution of all Weasleys. Did he not remember? Did he not remember? Or we like Quirrell, Ron says, oddly loyal. Percy narrows his eyes at his youngest brother. Hermione nods fiercely. He's really quite overlooked because of his stutter. Snape should lay off him, Harry mutters quietly. Oh, so they think it's Snape pressuring Quirrell. Why, Snape must give them cause to believe he's after the stone, which means either that Snape is going to make a stand for it soon, or Quirrell is. Either way, Percy is going to get there first. April 1992. As this is your owl year, I would expect several of you to. For the first time in your miserable existence, feel the need to study independently outside of class. Snape greets them one foggy Friday near the beginning of April. He begins passing back their latest papers, hovering over each student threateningly. These pathetic efforts, however, have conclusively disabused me of that notion. Does anybody care to venture a guess why? Nobody moves. The fifth-year Ravenclaws have this class with the Gryffindors, and neither party is fool enough to risk answering a question that is clearly a trap. Analyzing the strengthening solution, Snape continues nastily as he stalks around the classroom, is well within the grasp of the average fifth-year student that possesses some iota of intelligence, and yet you all persist in proving that you barely share a brain between you. Percy snorts. He can't help himself, even as a shocked gasp travels through the room. Snape can be terrifying, but this casual malice is not particularly frightening. If anything, it is rather amusing, particularly since Percy does not entirely disagree. His classmates would be able to complete the assignments if they merely spent their free time studying instead of snogging in corridors. Percy had twice seen Alexander wrapped around a sixth-year Hufflepuff in an alcove near Myrtle's bathroom. Both times he'd hastily averted his eyes and walked by quickly, but he couldn't shake the thought that Alexander had deliberately planted himself in his path just to show off. "Something amusing you, Mr. Weasley?" "No, sir," Percy says, his lips still twitching despite himself. 5 points from Gryffindor," Snape says, dropping his paper in front of him. Percy's peers scowl at his back, and he tries to adapt his facial expression into something more appropriate. "Yes, sir." The lesson proceeds as it does normally, except for that on Percy's exam paper, spiky handwriting instructs him to be at the Great Hall at 10 p.m. He dresses warmly, warding his clothing against water and tears. For all of Snape's gleeful premonitions that Percy will poison himself during a harvesting session, the man has been restricting Percy to gathering plants by the edge of the forbidden forest on the occasional Sunday afternoon. This, however, is different. Snape meets him outside the Great Hall wearing dark pants and a dark sweater. Percy gapes a bit at seeing him out of his customary robes and sheepishly shrugs his own off when Snape acridly wonders aloud if Percy desires a creature to snag him by the train of his robes. "I suppose you thought you had no need of dragon-hide gloves," Snape says, with a derisive glance at Percy's bare hands. One wonders where this notion of invincibility arises. Percy glares a little. "I don't have dragon-hide gloves, Professor. The I can't afford them goes unsaid." Snape hands over a sleek pair. "Return these at the conclusion of each meeting and procure your own by the beginning of the next term if you wish to continue subjecting me to your presence," he says before turning on his heel. Percy shrinks his robes to stuff in his trouser pocket, relieved he wore a warm sweater, and hurries after his professor. They make their silent way into the forest. This is the first time Percy has been in here at night, and he finds it dark and unsettling. He sticks close to Snape, who gives him a mocking glance but allows him to trail at his heels. The moon shines round and full overhead. Percy listens carefully for the howl of the wolf, but hears nothing. They stop at the base of a large and ancient tree. Percy recognizes the silvery green plant twined around its base. Moonvines, used for protection. Incredibly powerful and more than a little risky due to their volatile nature. "Professor," he says slowly, "what exactly do you anticipate needing these for?" Snape's lips press into a thin smile. "There are monsters about," he says quietly. "I find it best to be prepared for all manner of them." Percy meets his eyes and thinks of a dark shadow twisting out of a rich purple turban. "Who protects Hogwarts, Professor? Or should I say, what?" Percy asks as he bends to harvest the hissing vines. No wonder Snape lent him dragon-hide gloves. The vines are liable to snap and lunge, and their venom is poisonous until it is twice boiled in an infusion with fairy clover. "An interesting question," Snape says approvingly. "The headmaster, of course, has his own set of wards and protections. The castle has her own as well. Each professor is called upon to add to those protections. Are they tied in any way to the portraits of the old headmasters?" He feels, rather than sees, Snape's evaluative glance. The man drawls. "I am surprised to see a modicum of intelligent reasoning in you. Yes, Weasley, that is one reason why each headmaster is preserved in memoriam. How are your studies into portraiture going?" "Poorly," Percy admits, sucking air through his teeth when a vine wraps tightly around one of his fingers. He quietly incants the Sunday's spell and watches it creep into the shade of his hand. It's interesting, really. A portrait can only be made of somebody while they're alive or recently dead. It seems as though you need a part of them, a representative matter, to somehow imbue the portrait with their— He stops, not wanting to say it in front of Snape and risk his derision. Their soul, Snape completes. Indeed, if you are truly serious about completing the portraiture potion, I expect you to take it seriously. It may take the remainder of your time here at Hogwarts to complete. Percy jerks up his head and stares at his professor with surprise. Why? I am bored, Snape says languidly and likely evasively. I have never dabbled in portraiture, and I expect to receive a fair amount of amusement from your varied failures. Once again, the wish to confide in Snape rises inside Percy, and he must tamper it down forcefully. The only effective way to keep a secret is not to tell anyone. I will do my best to provide said amusement, he says again, and focuses again on his task. Professor. When Snape does not respond, Percy ventures again. Do you think Hogwarts is safe? Focus, boy, says Snape instead of responding, flicking his wand to singe a vine, hopefully targeting the soft underside of Percy's left wrist. What do you mean by safe? Safe from harm, from enemies, dark wizards. Snape looks rather like how Percy imagines a vampire would look, his pale skin illuminated by the soft moonlight and the wind whistling through his dark hair. Have you reason to doubt the efficacy of the castle's defenses? Percy does not speak the truth. Professor Quirrell has much to say about the dangers he encountered during his travels, he says instead, innocently. Particularly as my tenure at Hogwarts winds down, it makes me contemplate what else I may encounter when I am less protected than I may be here. Snape rolls his eyes. You would do best not to listen to frightening stories before bed, lest they give you nightmares you cannot wake from, the older man says dryly. I assure you that there is no living wizard that can match the headmaster for magical ability. You will be safe here, and when you graduate into your small and insipid little life, you will be safe there too. Percy thinks of the ministry, and of a dark lord stalking through the halls, and has to bite down on his lower lip before he says something contradictory to both statements that he will later regret. May 1992, Charlie and Percy get a drink in Hogsmeade the night that Charlie comes to rescue a dragon. Charlie looks well, bronzed and healthy, glowing with months of sunlight and heavy manual labor. His friends look the same, masculine in a way that Percy can only cautiously admire from afar. In contrast to Bill, Charlie is clearly not their leader, but he just as clearly has their respect, and Percy watches curiously as they tease and jostle Charlie, who teases and jostles them right back. They accept Percy without question into the amorphous mass that walks cheerfully down the dark streets of Hogsmeade, and Percy, for once, does not feel aware of the way his glasses sit on his nose, and the slight hunch to his posture that he knows he overcompensates for, and the smattering of spots that mar his nose. You've changed, Percy. Charlie flicks his gaze up and down Percy's tall and slim frame. You never would have snuck out to meet me before. Despite Percy's general disregard for the rules in this timeline, he feels as though still must defend them. He is 28, a veritable old man by any metric. His peers cannot say the same and therefore must obey the rules. Rules exist for a reason, Charlie. I am not ashamed to follow them. And yet here you are, Charlie says, waving his hand around the hog's head. The grizzled bartender had given Percy an evaluative glower, but given that Percy does not quite trust the effects of alcohol on his young body, had not had any cause to question him for the sparkling water he had ordered. How did you get here anyway? Percy cannot help but smirk. A secret passage. And you say you haven't changed. Charlie's obvious glee at this bit of rule-breaking makes Percy feel somewhat smug. Proud of you, Percy. So, all year, huh? Surprised you're not driving us all mad. What can he say? He's long surpassed the Hogwarts curriculum. Only in his private lessons with Snape and McGonagall does he feel like he is even remotely challenged. He will get all O's on his owls, like he did the first time, and like he would in every timeline. Percy merely explains, as he did in the first timeline to everyone that would listen. Exams do not need to be stressful. With adequate preparation, all material can be mastered. Exams do not exist to trick the student, merely to provide him with an opportunity to prove what he knows. Spoken like a true swot, Charlie says. Since it's affectionately given, Percy does not take offense. Any girls? Boys. Percy lets his general disdain answer that question silently. Right, of course. Nobody on my end either, if you were so curious. How's Ron? Friends with the boy who lived, I hear. If only Charlie knew how close Ron would become to the boy who lived. He's convinced Snape is evil. He's frustrated that Hermione Granger believes house elves are slave labor, and he's illegally smuggling a dragon out of the school, so a normal first year, really. Charlie laughs and checks his watch. Downing the rest of his pint, he motions to his friends at the next booth. Want to come? You can be our cover, just a good prefect shepherding his younger brother's friends to bed. Not a prefect, Percy reluctantly admits as they head back to the castle. Not a prefect. Is McGonagall mad? You were made to be a prefect. Percy smiles uncomfortably. She thinks I am not integrating with my peers. Charlie rolls his eyes and pulls his broom out of his pack, unshrinking it fluidly. Her loss. Odd, though. I hear McGonagall raves about you. Mum's very proud of her young animagus. Hop on, Percy. I don't fly, Percy states definitively. It'll be over before you know it. Come on, don't be a wuss. Percy very gingerly climbs on. If he spends the entire ride to the astronomy tower clutching Charlie very tightly, his brother is kind enough not to mention it. One interesting byproduct of the visit is that Harry, in his adolescent fear, leaves the invisibility cloak crumpled by the edge of the tower. Percy pauses to pick it up. Do no young boys learn to keep their things neatly? And therefore is unable to stop Harry and Hermione from running straight into a very unamused McGonagall. He is not above using it to avoid detection himself, and whispers a silent apology to young Harry, who will not have a very pleasant morning. The cloak is like nothing Percy has ever seen before. It shimmers when it is folded on his bed, but becomes entirely invisible when worn, almost as if it senses when it is around a person. He tests it on several items in his dorm and concludes that while it can mask other objects, it only becomes a true cloak of invisibility when worn. With a pop, Mimsy appears next to him. Myrtle is not far behind. Percy curses and only manages not to fall off his bed through sheer reflex. What are you doing? Percy hisses. Luckily, his hangings were drawn and his protective spells activated. His roommates would hopefully not notice the intruders. Myrtle pouts at him. I cannot believe you thought a house elf could do this better than me. You cannot carry objects through walls, Myrtle. We've discussed this at length. Percy snaps back. Don't be a child. When she threatens to sniffle, he points a threatening finger at her. If you dare drench my bed, I will not show you the new map. This forestalls her tears, and she settles down mutinously. Percy turns to Mimsy, waiting patiently for her turn. Master Percy, sir, Mimsy has finished the task, she says breathlessly. He frowns at her, holding a slim hand out for the map. She produces it obediently. I thought you were efficient, Mimsy. It's been ages. Hogwarts is a very big castle, sir, Mimsy says obstinately before catching herself. But Mimsy punishes himself, sir. Right away, Mimsy slams her head into the bedpost. Absolutely not, he says, alarmed. Between Mimsy threatening to enact bodily harm on his bed and Myrtle liable to flood the room, he'll be lucky if he escapes this interaction unscathed. I forbid it. Let me see the map. You kept it a secret. Yes, sir, Mimsy is very discreet, sir. As he unfolds the map, Percy has to concede that Mimsy is right. Hogwarts is a very big castle. There are all sorts of rooms that the original marauders missed. In fact, he deduces, as he peers closer at it, many of the rooms overlap each other in some feat of folded wizard space. Percy is not particularly interested in magical construction, despite his studying in that corner of the library for over a decade, but he is impressed by the complexity of the Hogwarts castle. Myrtle floats nearer to him. Wow, Mims, you did a fine job, she says enthusiastically, earlier grudge forgot. So many rooms, Percy. We'll never find anything at this rate. Master Percy and Miss Ghost loses something, Mimsy chimes in. She too crowds around him until she can see the map. Master and Miss should try the room of hidden things. All lost things end up in the room of hidden things. Master Percy walks 3 times and thinks of what yous need. She points at it with a long, crooked finger. He exchanges an excited look with Myrtle. 7th floor, not a floor he explored very thoroughly. We'll take a look, Mimsy. I'll call on you if I have any other tasks. Please, Master Percy, call Mimsy, she says, sweeping a low curtsy. He eyes her, but she manages to stay balanced, even as she wobbles on the uneven surface of his bed. Mimsy enjoys having the extra work. He flaps a hand at Myrtle too after Mimsy pops away. "Begone, Miss Ghost. I've studying to do." Myrtle giggles and dives through his bed into the floor, leaving a lingering chill behind. Percy murmurs the locating charm over the map, eager to see if his modifications are still active after the expansions. Snape is in his office, McGonagall in her chambers, and Quirrell is in the Forbidden Forest, which normally is no cause for alarm. However, Percy looks in alarm as two darts grow ever nearer, Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy, and Harry doesn't have the cloak. Swearing, Percy gathers up his things and pulls the cloak over himself with only the briefest of hesitations. It is rather unlike him to go charging into danger, but he can't let Harry get killed. It is very possible in the first timeline Harry had the cloak and hid from Quirrell until the danger passed. But no, Percy had needed to study the damn thing, and he might have just damned the whole world as a result. He finds the children easily, aided in equal parts by the map, a point-me spell, and their loud, childish bickering. He finds Quirrell too, and stands absolutely still beneath the cloak until the possessed man stumbles past. Despite himself, Percy shivers. This is the closest he's ever been to the Dark Lord. Harry's cloak must be made of strong family magic, for Quirrell does not even hesitate as he brushes past Percy. Riddle doesn't seem to be tracking Harry, however. He seems intent on following a trail invisible to Percy. Keeping several measured paces behind, Percy follows quietly, wand out. Quirrell's movements are jerky, nothing like the grace Percy always imagined would characterize Riddle. Perhaps the man is fighting the possession. Nevertheless, Riddle succeeds in forcing Quirrell on until the object of his hunt is apparent. A young unicorn foal scratches at a tree root, the tension in her body belied by the taut muscles in her legs. She knows something is wrong in the forest, and Percy does too, a question he'd been wondering suddenly answered. Riddle has been living a half-life artificially extended, sustained on the blood of the purest creature known to their world. It sickens him, as it would sicken any wizard, the idea so antithetical to his way of life that he would not be more disgusted to see Riddle eat a young boy with his bare hands. He doesn't move as Riddle traps the unicorn with a whispered spell, doesn't move as the horrid spectre bends over his prize, doesn't move until he hears Malfoy and Harry's youthful voices stop abruptly. Acting from instinct, he turns and casts the strongest protection spell he knows over the two boys, the silver of the shield fading just as Riddle looks up and locks eyes with his enemy. Harry shouts and clasps a hand to his forehead, and even in his shock Percy takes a heartbeat to note that reaction. Why? But then there's a centaur, of all things, braying at the Dark Lord, and Quirrell flees with blood still staining his mouth, and Percy is suddenly alone to watch the unicorn die. "I'm sorry," he says into the silence, still under the cloak. "I am going to beat him, you know." The unicorn gives no indication that she's heard. Percy knows he ought to leave her be, but he cannot bring himself to move, and so boy and unicorn stand together in the cold, whistling wind, both left behind by the Dark Lord, one dying and one with a face wet with tears. He doesn't take the cloak off until he's back in his room, his hands shaking. He'll return it tomorrow, as soon as he can sneak into their dormitory. Tom Riddle is obsessed with immortality to the point where he will murder a unicorn to get it. But what does that do to his soul? One thing is clear. This shade absolutely cannot be allowed to gain possession of the stone. Percy stations Myrtle to watch the underground room to inform him of any changes. She reports that Dumbledore has moved a giant mirror into the room, but aside from that it remains untouched. Percy and Myrtle choose the next Hogsmeade weekend as the best time to try for the Room of Hidden Things. Percy makes his excuse to his peers, who are still frosty with him due to Henry's continued disappointment. It still baffles Percy that Henry would care so deeply for Landon when they are not even in the same house nor on the same side of wizarding society, and so he is left in peace with hardly a protest. They meet in front of the spot that Mimsy pointed out on the map, across from a very upsetting tapestry involving dancing trolls performing unspeakable acts. It sends Myrtle into a fit of giggles, and Percy turns and glares sternly at her. Her presence here is highly conditional, allowed primarily due to her strong performance during their last adventure, and perhaps his growing fondness for the ghost. and his desire for company, though he was loath to admit it. She obediently straightens and zips her lips, though she cannot resist a pirouette when Percy turns back to the blank wall. Percy ignores her and thinks instead of Mimsy's instructions. I need the room of hidden things, he thinks clearly to himself as he walks back and forth. Lo and behold, a door. Percy is just thinking of how easy it all is after several years of hunting when he opens the door and sees what all has been lost inside Hogwarts. Everything, apparently. There are long and winding rows of junk, stretching as far as the eye can see in every direction. Percy and Myrtle silently cross the threshold and close the door, struck dumb by the sheer volume of things. Quidditch equipment, and statues and textbooks and quills, robes and cauldrons and desks and hats. Even a large brass tuba from an earlier time hangs precariously from what appears to be a coat rack. Merlin's balls, Myrtle breathes appreciatively. Think this is where vanished objects go? Must be, Percy responds, still dazed. The opportunistic part of his mind starts ticking. He's here for the diadem, of course, but there is so much in here that there's got to be something useful. That solid lead cauldron to his left, for instance, would be a good addition to his stores. We are going to index it, he announces, pulling out his wand. Tag anything useful. Useful for what? Percy smiles grimly. Pretend you are fighting a war, he says, and we'll go from there. She gives him a ghostly look. One day you're going to tell me what you're hiding from me, she says, trailing cold fingers across his shoulder. I'm very good at secrets, you know. I'd never tell. Unless a handsome boy smiled at you, Percy retorts, turning to his left. I'll take this direction, meet in half an hour. Myrtle giggles delightedly. You're a handsome boy too, Percy Weasley, and I don't tell you all of my secrets. I didn't know you had secrets that don't involve me. Myrtle preens. It's an odd sight for a ghost, but Percy is used to it. I have 50 years of secrets, she reveals. Everyone likes to cry to dear old Myrtle. One day, Percy says, waving her off. We'll exchange our most terrible secrets. Now, let's go. We need to focus. Remember the location of anything useful, and I'll come and tag it with my wand. He sets off down his chosen path. Suddenly alone in the cavernous depths of the room of hidden things, he feels a faint chill. He checks the map, but the complex layering of runes that allows the magic to fill and document the space around it does not seem to work in the room. Perhaps an area of folded wizard space. He adds it to his ever-growing list of things to research. He really needs a time turner. Without the aid of the map, Percy makes do with frequent revealing charms, searching for dangerous curses or wards or animals. Some of the objects appear to be heavily cursed. One menacing statue of a warthog alights with a veritable rainbow of warnings when he casts a diagnostic charm at it. He backs away slowly and goes toward the safer pile of discarded robes. He tags several things of interest, though he dare not touch them without further study. A pair of dueling armbands, meant to help channel wandless magic. A few old books from the days when Hogwarts was less concerned about the corruption of young minds. Vials and bottles that could possibly hold something useful or interesting. And a great big leather trunk that, from his initial examination, seems to contain multiple compartments. He wonders about the students, professors. That came before him. Why would they discard some of these things, many of which seem perfectly usable and possibly valuable? Or was it, as Myrtle suggested, through some twist of magic, this was where lost or even vanished items ended up? Not magically vanished, of course. Percy knows the theory. But perhaps this is Hogwarts' large lost and found. Or perhaps they, like he, needed a base of operations, somewhere to hide his work from the prying eyes of professors and peers. Perhaps they, like the previous he, did not find solace in a cold bathroom with a weepy ghost. Perhaps for all the years Hogwarts was a haven for students, those students had secrets and ambitions and the need for refuge. Percy briefly debates asking Mimsy to pop him into the last room of Dumbledore's game, as he's begun to call it in his head, but he disregards the idea. As much as Mimsy enjoys the odd task that Percy has for her, she's loyal to the school. Percy is careful to use her only for things he can explain as the activities of a precocious yet paranoid student, such as helping him with the map. Furthermore, he figures he may as well see if Dumbledore added any additional challenges. They go easier the second time. Music, fire, Immobulus, checkmate, and a nifty hex meant to fell a rampaging elephant. Thank goodness for Sonali Agarwal, Landon's current love interest, and her knowledge. He really must expand his lexicon beyond the English canon. He drinks the correct potion after scanning the riddle again and then steps into the final room. The mirror of Erist greets him. So does one Severus Snape. Percy's wand is already out, but he finds himself disarmed before he can process that the shadowy figure in front of the mirror is his potions professor. Snape actually laughs, a dry chuckle that makes Percy sweat nervously. "I admit I am unsurprised to see you here," Snape says, leveling his wand at Percy. "I should have warned you away when I caught you at the trapdoor. I just wanted to see what was here," Percy lies, trying to sound embarrassed. "I figured a trapdoor must be hiding something." "Do not lie to me," Snape says lazily, wand still trained on Percy. "I set a ward at the entrance, and it took you under an hour to reach this chamber. You have been here before." Percy thinks quickly. Behind Snape, the mirror gleams, and he latches onto the idea gratefully. "I wanted to see the mirror of Erist," he says, trying to sound longing, as if so enthralled by the mirror that he would risk detection just to see it. "By all means, take a look at whatever insipid dream you imagine is your desire," Snape says magnanimously, motioning with his wand. Percy steps up nervously, but avoids looking directly in the mirror. There could be a trap embedded in the glass, now that the mirror is part of Dumbledore's game. "I'd rather not, Professor. It has occurred to me that the mirror may be dangerous. I suppose it's good that you caught me here." "I assure you, it is perfectly safe," Snape says, visibly amused at Percy's flimsy attempts to avoid looking into the mirror in front of him. "The headmaster told me himself." The headmaster has a unique idea of what safe means. Snape raises an eyebrow. "Only those who seek to do no harm with it may be assured of it," were his exact words. "We're going to discuss precisely why it is that you feel so unsafe in Hogwarts, Weasley." Percy narrows his eyes, tuning out the latter half of Snape's silky sentence. An odd thing for the headmaster to say, really. How can one seek to do harm with the mirror of Erist? It is unlikely that Quirrell knows it is here, given that Percy is relatively sure that Quirrell hasn't made his way through the traps yet. Snape snaps at him, his tone curt. "Go on then, Weasley. You made your way down to the depths of this little secret. Go on and seek your reward. It shan't hurt you. Those who seek to do no harm with it may be assured of it. Harm with the mirror. Be assured of the mirror. Be assured of harm. It's not very grammatical." Percy bites his lip as he thinks over the words. "Don't tell me you're suddenly shy," says Snape in some disgust. "Fine. We will leave here, and you will never nose into matters that do not concern you again. You understand?" When he looks into the mirror, he sees his figure is very much the same, though with one notable exception. In his left hand, he triumphantly holds a striking red gem. Those who seek to do no harm with it may be assured of it. Dumbledore is speaking of the Philosopher's Stone. Percy realizes in a dawning second and drags his eyes up to meet his reflections. "I will do no more harm," he promises, staring at his future self desperately. His eyes traverse over the image. Gryffindor's sword, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, Slytherin's locket. This time, instead of unspeakable robes, he wears the purple outfit of the Minister of Magic. Fred winks at him from the array of siblings arranged behind him, and Percy focused on his laughing face. "I will do no harm with it," he wishes fiercely. As Snape reaches out a hand to pull back Percy, Fred winks again and plucks the red stone from Percy's hand, dropping it lithely in Percy's pocket. His robes tug away from it, and Percy inhales very sharply, trying desperately not to let any of his thoughts cross his face. "Had your fill," Snape drawls, pulling Percy's shoulder roughly. "Detention, every day next week, 7 o'clock. Little boys shall learn not to investigate where they don't belong." Percy does not respond, in the middle as he is in a prolonged panic attack. He has the Philosopher's Stone. He has the fucking Philosopher's Stone. And you shall do no harm with it, he thinks to himself, like a vow. "Why are you here, sir?" he gasps out in a desperate attempt to deflect attention. Snape's glare is icy enough to freeze a summer day. "That is none of your business, Weasley. Why is any of this here? Why hide the mirror?" Snape turns suddenly and slams Percy against the rough stone wall. "Give you leeway, boy," he hisses, and his face is very close to Percy's own. "You amuse me, a Weasley heir who plays at potions and dabbles in dark magic. Do not mistake my amusement for leniency. You're where you do not belong. You have no right to ask questions of me, nor of the headmaster." I would inform him of your behavior if he did not have more pressing things to attend to than a worm of a student wriggling into the dirt. Percy nods rapidly. The stone seems to burn a hole in his pocket. He resolutely focuses on his occlumency shields and does not make eye contact. Detention, every day next week, Snape says again, releasing him. Percy nearly crumples from relief but catches himself in time. I shall escort you out, and you are never to speak to me with disrespect again. Snape waves his wand without verbalizing a spell, and a small door appears in the corner of the room. It opens into the third-floor corridor, somehow opposite the door leading to the trapdoor. Snape ushers him through at one point. Do not return here, Snape says when they are through, towering over him. There are dangers you cannot dream of, Weasley, in your insipid mind. Run back to your little lion's den and cease this pretense of independence. Yes, sir, Percy says obediently and flees. He has the fucking Philosopher's Stone. Back in his dorm, he deposits the stone inside the trunk he'd retrieved finally from the Room of Hidden Things. He wards it so fiercely that he wagers even Bill would struggle to break through the defenses and then collapses on his bed. Worry suddenly strikes. Can Dumbledore tell he has the stone? Will he be able to tell that it's taken? What will Percy say? Will he be expelled? A sick feeling in his stomach, Percy hurriedly fetches the map. Snape, he notes, has disappeared, likely back into the final room. Does he not know of the stone? Perhaps he is waiting there to protect it from Quirrell. Quirrell is in his chambers. What does Quirrell do to sleep? Percy's mind is feverish and quick. Does Quirrell lay on his side? Does Riddle have a preferred side to sleep? Dumbledore is also not on the map. Percy worries his lower lip. Perhaps Dumbledore is inside with Snape. Maybe they already know he's the culprit. Oh, why did he think this was a good idea? He knew he couldn't mess with the timeline. It had all been out of his control. Percy spends the rest of the night watching the map. Dumbledore does not reappear. Neither does Snape. Percy spends the last few weeks walking on eggshells, flinching at every loud noise. His detentions with Snape are surprisingly mundane. He scrubs cauldrons and debones sprite bugs. The man is clearly distracted, hardly even tormenting him during the evening's punishment. Percy watches him and comes to the conclusion that Snape must know Quirrell is going to make a stand. His classmates tease him about finally succumbing to the pressure of the owls. Even Professor McGonagall lets up on his last few animagus lessons before the summer, telling him to focus on his health and get some sun. Every time he sees Dumbledore at a meal, Percy chooses a seat that faces the opposite direction. He occludes so heavily that he sometimes feels as though his classmates are speaking to him from the other end of a very dark tunnel. Meanwhile, the stone weighs on him. What worries him is that he does not know what happens to the stone in the original timeline. Does Dumbledore keep it and use it at a critical juncture? Is it destroyed? Does Riddle keep it and use it to resurrect himself? Percy knows that Quirrell is vanquished, yet the shade of Tom Riddle remains. But how could a shade handle the stone anyway? It's likely that it is destroyed in whatever battle occurs between Harry and Tom. Still, Percy cannot help but wonder. He wars with himself about whether to return the stone. Presumably, Harry discovers the same enchantment, and in whatever confrontation erupts between he and Quirrell, destroys the stone. Will Percy need to destroy the stone too? That he does not know how to put the stone back in the mirror convinces him to stay put for now, though he increases his surveillance on the third-floor corridor. He may need to step in and save Harry if his removal of the stone has unintended consequences. When he sees Harry, Ron, and Hermione sneak out toward the end of term, he follows. He quietly renovates Longbottom, interrogates him, and hits him with a mild confounding charm before slipping out after the trio. He stands outside the third-floor corridor and debates with himself as they disappear inside. Should he follow them? They survived the first time, but he may have already irrevocably changed the timeline. But will his disillusionment charm hold up to the challenges? He has no way to explain to the three why he followed them. What if Dumbledore is there? He decides cautiously to wait, though he's prepared to follow if needed. After nearly an hour and a half, Ron and Hermione stagger out. Percy has to stifle a gasp. Ron is very pale and his head has a crown of dried blood. He's leaning heavily on Hermione. There's a clatter of discarded brooms. Percy twitches to help them, but forces himself to stay still as they hobble past him. They seem worried, but not in shock. Harry must still be alive. Is he battling Riddle? Percy looks at the door again and imagines an 11-year-old boy facing off against the broken soul of the darkest wizard of their time while he waits in the shadows. It shames him. And then Dumbledore is there, roaring a command that causes the other door to pop into being. He hurtles through it without even a glance at Percy, whose disillusionment charm likely would not have held up to even a second of Dumbledore's full attention. Percy takes that moment to flee. He goes straight to the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey is already healing Ron and tutting about midnight Quidditch dares. Percy makes up a story about finding Neville confused in the common room, and she releases Ron into his care. "We've got to go to the 3rd floor," Ron says hoarsely, his face white. Percy wonders for a second how scrawny Harry Potter won the undying loyalty of his brother in under 9 months. By the end of Percy's first year, both times, he'd barely made inroads with his classmates and still felt awkward deciding who to sit next to at meals. By the end of Ron's first year, he'd found a friend he would risk death for, or maybe two, depending on how 11-year-old Ron felt about 11-year-old Hermione. What happened on the 3rd floor? The whole story spills out in the corridor outside the hospital wing, and with it tears from both Ron and Hermione. Percy, after a furious internal debate, hugs them both gingerly and conjures them handkerchiefs. "He who must not be named," Percy asks, feigning surprise. "The Philosopher's Stone. It can't be, not at Hogwarts." "It is." Ron is frustrated enough to stamp his foot, reminding Percy suddenly of a young Ginny. "Well, if Dumbledore says so," Percy says soothingly. He knows better than to criticize Dumbledore within earshot of anyone. "Harry will be fine, just you wait. Headmaster Dumbledore is the finest wizard of our time. No harm will come to either of you in Hogwarts, he who must not be named or not." "Well said," says Dumbledore, and Percy flinches. He has got to come up with a way to prevent people from sneaking up on him so easily. He smiles vaguely at Dumbledore and drops his eyes to the floor, but it seems to be an unnecessary precaution. Dumbledore does not even try to meet his eyes, nor pay him much attention. Cradled in his arms is Harry's small body, and all of his attention, and Ron's attention, and Hermione's, and even Percy's, is drawn instantly to the crumpled figure. Harry looks improbably smaller when Dumbledore deposits him gently onto the nearest bed. Percy's heart leaps into his throat at the pale cast of Harry's face, but Madame Pomfrey takes possession over her patient with an efficient series of gestures. "Magical exhaustion primarily," Dumbledore tells her. "Check for burns on his hands and run diagnostics on his scar. I don't expect he shall wake tonight. I will return tomorrow." He gives a meaningful look to the hospital warden, who nods grimly back to him. The elderly wizard claps his hands and turns to Ron and Hermione. "You have both been very brave," he says gravely, and the two children flush, tears forgot. "You are a credit both to your house and to your friend." For a wild second, Percy imagines Dumbledore telling him the same, and then he shakes his head. Percy does not feel any more comfortable around Dumbledore in this timeline than he did in the last. He does not feel it particularly likely Dumbledore will ever have cause to praise him, unless Percy joins the Order, which is still a decision he must make. "You will recover. Your quick actions may have saved many lives tonight. I can only apologize that I was not here sooner. Now, I believe bed is in order for all three of you." Dumbledore catches Percy's eye as they turn to leave. "Severus told me that he found you longing for the mirror," he says softly, his eyes glinting behind his half-moon frames. "Dwelling on dreams can be a dangerous pursuit. I am disappointed in you, Mr. Weasley, for going where you did not belong. You could have been gravely hurt." Percy burns with the injustice, but merely mumbles an apology. "See to it that you care for your brother, and learn to live in this world, and not in that of dreams. If you ever need to talk, dear boy, my door is open to you." Ron and Hermione eye him sideways as they return to the dorm, but he does not explain his interaction with Dumbledore. They do not need to know why the headmaster is disappointed in him. It is bad enough that they witnessed his chastising. Deep inside him, Percy longs to reveal the truth, if only to prove to Dumbledore that he is more than his brothers, that he too is worth the Order. But he cannot, not if he wants to win. He has to tamper his resentment and continue on his lonely path to an unacknowledged victory. As far as Percy can tell, he did not ruin the timeline with the theft of the stone. Ron tells him that Dumbledore says the stone was destroyed in the fallout from Harry's attack. Percy registers in the corner of his mind that Harry's mother, apparently, is instrumental in Harry discovering powers previously unknown. For now, he is too overwhelmed by relief to immediately begin researching this new lead. He tries to clap without resentment when Ron, Harry, Hermione, and even Neville Longbottom are praised in front of the entire school. They all grin shyly, warmly, 4 11-year-olds honored by the headmaster himself. Percy knows that he will have to get used to staying in the shadows. Even Neville will slay his serpent. He bids goodbye to Myrtle and asks her to continue searching the room in his absence. Next year, he'll find the diadem. Now that he has the stone, many more things are in reach.